And as usual, we're looking through the Western media to give an Afrocentric take on what has transpired in said platforms. My name is Adesoji Iginla, and with me, as usual, is our explorer-in-chief, editor of Black Star News, Dr. Milton Allimadi.
One day, doctor. Thank you. Thank you for the, I really enjoy having the opportunity of catching up every week, man. There's so much going on. So
Yes.
it's always a pleasure to be on your show.
No, I mean, the pleasure is ours. Pleasure is ours because, like you said, a lot happens in the media, not least what is going on in Gaza.
Right.
And being that it is South Africa, a former apartheid state, that bring that to the fore, it's important that that be seen to a logical conclusion, and hopefully common sense is brought to bear. Because I think for some reason we seem to have lost our grasp of humanity. But hopefully that is not that's not the end game, because it will be it is already a human catastrophe, and
it's escalating out of
yeah. And so we're speaking about the African continent, and the first story today is one that takes us to Central Africa. We're talking about Chad. And Chad has been in the news lately, not least because it is giving the United States its marching orders. But I want us to look at this from an agency point of view, like you normally would say. The news is taken from the New York Times, one of the oldest voices of the imperialist West.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to look at the headline first and foremost. The headline says, U.S. to withdraw troops from Chad, dealing another blow to African policy. What is your initial take with regards to that?
Well, the headline is misleading. What the headlines were meant to say was that U.S. to withdraw troops from Chad, dealing another blow to U.S. Africa policy. Not even U.S. Africa.
Yeah.
But another blow to the United States agenda on Africa. It would be much more accurate.
I mean, I was actually going to read, making Chad the active state here and not the passive one. Because if you look at it's almost like it's a unilateral decision to withdraw the troops as opposed to Chad asking them to lead. But maybe if we go through the piece itself.
No, but no, you're right. You're right. We need to delve in that for a minute. The more accurate headline would be Chad expels U.S. troops.
Yeah. And so then we can then go into why that is the case. And we should go in further, and then a second. And so the lower we go, it says the Pentagon will withdraw dozens of special operation forces from Chad in the next few days, the second major blow in a week to the American security and counterterrorism policy in a volatile swath of West and Central Africa. Now, if one were to look at it, what is the issue in Central Africa? I know Sudan is an issue, but Sudan, if you're speaking Western Sudan, I can understand. But why would you then withdraw the troops? What could be the driving motive behind this?
Well, I mean, they've been kicked out, so they have no choice. But I think a more interesting thing would be, you read it, so I think our viewers should also read it carefully. The Pentagon will withdraw dozens of special operations forces from Chad in the next few days. the second major blow in a week to American security and counterterrorism policy. All right. So the question is that you're in Africa, you have Chad, they're talking about a volatile swath of West and Central Africa. But they're admitting that neocolonialism exists, imperialism exists. Because they're telling you quite clearly in their own words. Second major blow in a week to American security and counterterrorism policy.
All the way.
We're in Africa, but think about that carefully. You know? I mean, it's amazing. What are some of the things that emanate from the United States that really destroys Africa? It's the World Bank and the IMF, right?
Yes, correct.
Can you ever read a headline that African countries are now dismantling some operation they had that existed somewhere in the United States to address the damage that the World Bank and IMF are causing on Africa's economy? Because that would be the equivalent.
Yeah.
That would be the equivalent because, you know, realistically speaking, people know we can never deploy African troops on US soil, right? And the way things exist right now concerning the balance of power, that's not possible or realistic, right? But what's the equivalent? That we actually have a policy, a structure, an organization, whether it's think tanks, whether it's African academics, who are working diligently to mitigate or even eliminate the damage that the World Bank and IMF have been inflicting and continue to inflict in Africa. But even that doesn't happen. We don't even have something like that.
Because you don't
counter the World Bank and IMF.
Yeah, because you don't have the agency.
Absolutely.
That's the key.
And that is the key word. The lack of agency in determining our own affairs and our own destiny. And look at it. I mean, the New York Times, look at the arrogance. Look at the level of our emasculation and defeat. That the New York Times sees nothing wrong with that headline that they wrote. They see nothing wrong with this passage that we just read right now. Imperialism is normalized. It is so normalized because the threat of us countering imperialism does not even cross their mind. When in fact, what is going on right now in West Africa is actually Africa countering imperialism and neocolonialism.
True.
You know?
And also, it's if you go further down, it says both countries want terms that better favor their interest. Analysts say the decision to withdraw from Niger is final. I guess so. But the US officials said they hope to resume talks on security cooperations after elections in Chad on May the 6th. Now, so you're saying the withdrawal is based on the notion that somebody feels your very presence undermines their credibility as
Absolutely.
there.
Absolutely, because the Chadian dictator is seeing what is happening around him, right?
Yep.
Idris Déby's son, Mahamat Déby.
Yep.
He's seeing what's happening in Niger, in Burkina, in Mali. He's seeing how unpopular French and US military presence in those countries have become, right?
Yep.
So he is feeling the heat and he wants to take that off the table, heading toward elections, which in any case are going to be rigged. We know that, right? But he still feels so sensitive about that issue that, and here's the thing, they're admitting to you in this article, and US officials are saying it, but of course you have to know how to read. Because some people read even what's before their eyes, they don't see it, they don't connect the dots. They're telling you both countries want terms that better favor their interest.
Their interest,
right?
Yep.
Analysts say the decision to withdraw from Niger is final. That one we know. Niger said, pack, leave. That's it.
And leave, yep.
So now they're implying that in this case, there's some difference. But US officials said they hoped to resume talks on security cooperation after elections in Chad on May 6th. In other words, this withdrawal is for public relations
only
purposes.
That's it.
You know? But obviously you have to know the background dynamics, what's going on in other parts of West Africa. Otherwise, you will not understand these coded terms. Right?
I mean,
so they go to the next paragraph, but still, if you're not familiar, you will not make the connection. They're saying the departure of US military advisors in both countries comes as we just discussed right now, Niger, as well as Mali and Burkina Faso, turning away from years of cooperation with the United States and forming partnerships with Russia, were at least exploring closer security ties with Moscow. All right? They told you that, but they're still not telling you explicitly
why
that because of these things, you know, Debbie Jr. in Chad needs to create that fictitious firewall. You know? It's right there. But you have to really understand what is going on in Africa, the US agenda in Africa. Then only then can you understand how to read and understand what is being written.
And, you know, it's which is one of the reasons why this program should be encouraged, and we implore people to subscribe, share, and invite your friends to come and view what we do here and support the channel. And what I find very interesting is in this paragraph here, it says the impending departure of the US military advisors. They're Green Berets, so they're not military advisors. They're soldiers, you know, from a sprawling desert nation at the crossroads of the continent, was prompted by a letter from the Chadian government this month that the United States saw as threatening to end an important security agreement with Washington. Now, why is it so important? Why is it so pivotal that you be there in that particular spot? Like you said earlier, they've lost the foothold in Niger.
Correct.
They don't have a foothold in, I mean, can you see how we even normalize it now? That we're saying they don't have a foothold.
Right.
It doesn't even come as something odd that we are normalizing the presence of foreign military troops.
Right.
I mean, the AU Charter says no one should interfere with the territorial integrity of member states. Nkrumah once said that the mere presence of foreign troops on your soil is indicative of the fact that your independence is nothing but paper independence.
Yep.
And you've alluded to that earlier with regards to the two instruments of imperialism, the World Bank and the IMF.
Yeah.
So one begins to wonder if once you have those three trinity, what's it called? Once you have the trinity in itself, the World Bank, the IMF, and of course, military.
WTO. The WTO, your friends, right?
Exactly. Once you have them in place, what else do you have in terms of not just agency, the mere fact that the presence of those troops is a danger not just to your citizens, but also to the countries nearby.
No, I mean, the best description is, I think we discussed in the first show.
Hmm.
The title of, I was trying to look up what year it was first published. Not Yet Uhuru, or Denga Oginga's book. I think it was published in 1964. It's a classic. It's as relevant today as when he published it 60 years ago, right? The late Oginga Odinga, the father of Raila Odinga.
Hmm.
You know, this to me is the best demonstration. And I hope that our young people are angered by this. You know, how many African countries are deploying their soldiers in the United States or deploying their soldiers in Europe? Think about that.
Hmm.
Why should we allow any African misruler to deploy United States or French or British troops on African soil? It's completely unacceptable. If you are not capable to provide security for our country, why should you be ruling that country? Think about that. That's the obvious question. You
True.
can't
True.
protect our security. You can't feed us, right? We have food shortages. You can't create jobs. We have unemployment going up to 60% in some cases. So why should you be ruling us? You know, these are the kind of things that young people should ask, and they should work toward ending it. Organize, agitate, do whatever you can to bring about better leadership, because it is your life at the end of the day that is being squandered and destroyed, you see?
Yeah. I mean, you've heard it. It's important. It's imperative that in order to assert your independence, your territory must be free of foreign troops.
Absolutely.
And I mean,
It's the basic thing. Otherwise, why are you calling yourself independent? Right? What were the elements that imposed colonial rule on Africa? He was just not the colonial governor. The colonial governor was in charge of the armed forces and the police forces, correct? The
true.
officers were Europeans. Africans were the ones recruited to do the dirty footwork, the legwork, right?
Yes.
So now you have a situation where you've invited them back as quote unquote advisors, or sometimes they deploy even 1,000 is what they had in Niger, right? US had 1,000 Niger. The French had a few thousand, you know, with full garrisons there. So what is in fact, that to me is one of the elements that soldiers can use as rationale when they're removing these governments. We are supposed to be the national army. So why is there deployment of French troops here, or American troops, or British troops? That in itself is enough. And the misruler would have no argument. How can you how would you argue with that? You know, if your officers got rid of you and they said we are supposed to be the national army, and yet we have 2,000 French troops deployed in our country. That is the reason why we took action. You, as the now deposed ruler, how do you counter that? You have nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you could say you were you were seeking international alliances. I mean, we've seen it done before, and part of the pact of continual colonization that the French got its former colonies to sign up to was
Right.
part and parcel of that was the
Correct.
stationing of troops on their territory.
Correct.
And so the longer that goes on, then it becomes the norm.
Right.
But unfortunately, like you said, for the leaders, that is. The youths are now much more aware, much more conversant, and asserting the agency that the leaders had gotten in the 60s.
Right, exactly. Right.
It's only taking the present generation now to assert that agency, to say, I mean, what's going on?
Right, right. And they must not stop at just the expulsion of the troops. That is only a symbolic, a symbolic part of what needs to be done. What we need to do is transform our economies. And we can only transform our economies by controlling our resources, number one. And then once you have that, you can use your resources to develop, to industrialize, set up your own agricultural policy. As Sankara said, produce what you consume and consume what you produce. Number one. Number two, he said, the African market for Africa, right?
Yep.
So you pursue these two strategies. Our young people have to become much more demanding. I think anything we do, any knowledge we share, we are sharing it to empower our young people. In some circles, they call it so-called radicalizing. No, we are not radicalizing anybody. We are lifting their consciousness to know that they have value. They must not tolerate misrule in any African country.
True. And Nkrumah, in his independence speech, did say the liberation of one without the others is empty liberation.
Right.
I'm paraphrasing now.
Right. No, he's right.
Yeah.
What we are seeing, any African leader who is not signed on to a United African Federation or United States of Africa, no matter whatever you call that entity, any leader who has not signed on to the agenda of borderless Africa, any leader who has not signed on to joint economic agenda, that leader is an enemy of Africa. And we should work to have less leaders like that and more leaders like Thomas Sankara.
Yes.
No, really, we have no choice. If we don't agitate, advocate, and push hard, we are going to leave our younger generation in a much more desperate condition than even what exists today,
Yes. And on that note, which gives us a very important segue to our next story, which is a subject that is very close to the heart of Sankara. And we're going to Algeria.
Yes.
I see. So the story here is Morocco and Algeria shared dispute leads to second Confederation of African Football Cup match cancellation. For the second straight week, an African Confederation Cup between Renaissance Berkane and that's the Moroccan side, and Algerian USM Alger was cancelled in a dispute over a map on the Moroccan t-shirts. As you can see, that's the map there. Now, that map is, you want to start?
Absolutely. I mean, this is something that I feel very strongly about because I went to Algeria in 2010. And there was a meeting of progressive elements from all over the world who came there to meet, to show solidarity with Polisario and the people of what was formerly called Western Sahara. But the people there call it the Sahrawi Democratic Republic. And I was able to also travel to the border area where many of the refugees live, right adjacent to the parts that they call the liberated zone that are controlled by Polisario. Polisario, of course, is the liberation army of the Sahrawi Democratic Republic. So I met with them. I met with the commanders. I met with, they have their own government in exile. I met with the ministers. I met with what they have, the structure of sort of like a legislative assembly in exile. And I was proud to find out that many of them were women. A very large proportion were women in very powerful positions, including in the armed resistance as well.
Okay.
Some of the soldiers and commanders were women. It was a very enlightening visit. The meetings itself in Algiers, the capital, and then traveling to the countryside where the Sahrawi are confined. And there, I mean, they operate their own hospitals with the assistance of Cuban doctors. I met Cuban doctors there helping them. They operate their own schools. In other words, they're practicing how to run the Sahrawi Democratic Republic once they should take power in what is now occupied by Morocco. The United Nations and Morocco, in fact, as well. Morocco had agreed to this, a referendum.
Yeah.
This is decades ago. But Morocco kept finding ways to postpone it.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, in the last few decades, it's really shipped people from Morocco physically to the Sahrawi Democratic Republic, of course, to change the balance of the population ethnically, to make it weigh in favor of Morocco, so that a referendum, of course, would not be the same as if it had been held decades ago.
Decades back, yeah.
Right, when this proposal was first made. So in fact, one of the insistence that the Sahrawi had been insisting was that only those who were registered at the time and lived in the Sahrawi Democratic Republic and their immediate descendants should be eligible to vote. And of course, Morocco would not agree to that arrangement. And that's why you have that stalemate. And it's lasted for a long time. So now it's creating a lot of tension because when they see that the door is closed toward a peaceful resolution of this matter, then of course they believe that the only incentive left to them is armed struggle.
Yep.
And then, as you know, when Donald Trump was president, he recognized Morocco's occupation of that part. He basically recognized that as part of Morocco. And that's why you see it drawn on the map. That was the issue of dispute there. They put it there like a small thing, but it's not a small thing. When it comes, it would be like Israel trying to go and play in a soccer match with their national team, and then the map of Israel would be drawn to include what should be
Gaza and West Bank.
Absolutely, Palestine. That would be the equivalence, and of course, that would not be a small issue, correct?
Correct.
So that is why this was not a small issue either, because Algeria has been supporting the liberation of the Sahrawi Democratic Republic for decades. It actually is no secret that way in the past it even intervened on their behalf. It trained their fighters, and it currently provides them sanctuary in Algeria. So that is the situation that prevails. And let me just ask one more point, which I think is very important. Of course, as our viewers should know, the Polisario and the Sahrawi are recognized by the African Union. So Sahrawi Democratic Republic is recognized as an independent African country by the African Union.
Yes. On that point, the recognition that was in 1984, and it was at the insistence of the Burkinabe delegation led by the late Captain Thomas Sankara.
Excellent.
Who said it is important that they be recognized because a voice without a summit without the Sahrawis is almost like saying that part of Africa does not exist.
Right. So now you're saying that. I want people to reflect on what you just said.
Yeah.
This man was in leadership from 83 to 87.
87, yeah.
then imperialism assassinated him. But look at the gifts and lessons he left us. You just listed one example of the many gifts that he left us. You know, I mean, the possibilities are endless, you know, in Africa. So, you know, when our young people see the current objective situation, they can become disillusioned, they become discouraged. And that, of course, is one factor in motivating a young person to, you know, go through South America, die in the jungles. They are trying to make it to
the United
States, or drown in the Mediterranean, or be kidnapped somewhere in Libya, you know, sold into sexual slavery in Libya, or held ransom until their family wires money, and then feeling a sense of accomplishment. Think about this: surviving sexual slavery and all that, and then thinking a sense of accomplishment once they reach the shores of the Mediterranean. They feel elation to have the opportunity to possibly drown or make it to Europe. It cannot get much more mind-boggling than that, because they lack knowledge, right? And you can't blame them. They're not going to get the knowledge from anywhere else except people who meet on platforms like this to tell them and instruct them that no, you have a better chance of changing things within your country than making it across the Mediterranean, than surviving sexual enslavement in Libya. Organize them. See what young people did in Senegal. That's what you need to do.
True.
In your countries. Get rid of these useless, corrupt misrulers and let young people start running the country. They can do it. In fact, you know, they like giving the impression that only these ancient men in the 70s and 80s can run a country. That's completely nonsense, because we know that the ones who led Africa to independence were in their 30s and 40s.
True.
You know, all of them, you know, except a few like Kenyatta, you know, but most of them, whether it was Julius Nyerere, Milton Obote, Modibo Keita, Kwame Nkrumah, Kaunda, Kenneth Kaunda,
Silvio Olympio,
you know, all these were people in their 30s and 40s. So that lie has already been disproven a long time ago, you see? So now we need our young people to have that confidence that they can do it. You're better off improving your life by getting rid of useless leaders than risking your life going to... in any case, why should you do that? Even if you get to Europe, what awaits you in Europe, right? You're going to be cleaning the streets. You're going to be cleaning toilets. You're going to be working in kitchens. You're going to be working on those plantations in Southern Europe, in Italy. You know, we understand why you do that, because things are so desperate. You want money to feed your family and your relatives. One thing I give them credit, they're not going there to loiter on the streets. No, so their heart is in the right place. They want to improve the conditions of their family. But I say you can do it back home. We have the resources that Europe and North America and China and Japan needs. So if we have the youth with a raised consciousness running those countries, in 10, 15 years, we'll be in a good space.
You'll be on the right space.
Yes.
And speaking of legacies, you mentioned the legacy left by Captain Somo Sankara. This crisis with the Western Sahara is actually a crisis that was bequeathed to us by the Reagan administration. Can you imagine that? And why? The Reagan administration supported King Hassan of Morocco at that time by giving him weapons, you know.
Right.
In 1981, he was said to have received in excess of 200 million. Now, here is the
Think
thing.
about that. That's 1981 dollars, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we are talking probably 6 to 800 million in
Million.
today's dollar. Right.
Exactly. So what did that 200 million go to? That 200 million went towards building a
Yes.
2,700-kilometer wall,
Electrified.
electrified, called the berm,
Right.
BERM, a wall. Now, that what does that wall do? It doesn't split the Sahara into two, it cuts it diagonally. So diagonally, it cuts it diagonally. And it was obviously the money wasn't it wasn't altruistic. It also then went in order to the money went to providing a training base for the UNITA rebels. Now imagine you've destabilized a body of people. Now you're training another body of people within Morocco to go
Right.
destabilize somewhere else within
Right.
the African continent. And, suffice to say, at some point, the idea was we were going to give you a referendum, which you've alluded to earlier. But now that has been circumvented by what Mr. Trump did. And Mr. Trump has a funny way of giving away stuff that don't quite belong to the Americans. Remember,
Right.
he gave away East Jerusalem.
Yep.
I mean, I don't know
Yep.
what is. He's a very charitable chappy. He seems to be, you know.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, yeah, at that time, the Clark Amendment um, had, restricted U.S. subversive work. After the the coups that the U.S. were involved in overseas,
Mhm.
assassination attempts, assassination of Lumumba, and all that, that covered with the Clark Amendment, Senator Clark in 1970s, which prohibited U.S. direct support for groups like UNITA, which was led by Jonas Savimbi. So the U.S. went through third parties like Morocco to funnel the aid, the weapons, and the money and the training. That's why Morocco was doing that. I just looked it up actually, and my guess was almost on target. 200 million
Mm.
in 1980 is worth 758 million today. So that was almost $1 billion
Wow.
that they got. Right.
Wow.
It's very unfortunate because at the end of the day, the Sahrawi Democratic Republic is going to be independent. Um, Nothing will stop that. They're so dedicated. One of the other things I wanted to mention, highly, highly educated.
Educated, yeah.
And once again, thanks initially Cuba, and then at some point Spain also. Spain has had some interesting governments over the years, like socialist governments. So they were giving a lot of scholarships. So they have a highly educated leadership, leadership and population in general. Education is, all of them dream to be trained in military skills and to get a degree and to liberate their country. So when you have that type of determination, nothing is going to stop them from eventually winning their independence.
The independence.
Mm.
Yeah. So speaking of independence, we have another problem brewing, and we go to the threat of large-scale massacre in Sudan,
Yes.
especially Darfur. According to the Voice of America, uh, a senior U.S. official warns Monday that more than 2 million people in El Fasher in Sudan's North Darfur region are under imminent threat of a large-scale massacre from a parliamentary group attack and urged the international community to pressure the warring parties to de-escalate. there are already credible reports that the RSF, that's the Rapid Support Force, and its allied militias have razed multiple villages west of El Fasher. Now, why is El Fasher very important? El Fasher is actually the hub where the UN distributes aid from.
Correct.
And if it's surrounded and attacked, that means the livelihood, the survival of so many people is in jeopardy.
Right. I mean, I don't even know what I can say about the Sudan situation. I can't really say much. Obviously, it's very frustrating. Um, there are so many elements involved in it. You know, it would take us like hours just to deconstruct
Yeah.
the ethnicity issue
The intricacies.
involved,
Yeah.
the religious issue involved, the Arab African divide,
Situation. Yeah.
all on its face, things that should be trivial are weaponized by the political and military class, the elite, the political and military class, right? The differences that should be celebrated, in any African setting, instead is used to maximize polarization, right? You say, I'm with you and we're against them. So I'm Arab, you're African, let's go after them, they're the enemy. I'm Christian, you're Muslim, oh, let's go after them, they're the enemy. I'm brown skinned, I'm much more richly melanated, so that should be the enemy. All the worst kind of possible scenarios are playing themselves out in Sudan. And the saddest thing is that, why are we talking about the UN and not the African Union? Think about that. You want any other evidence of the failure of the African Union? Why is the UN, being mentioned significantly?
Yeah, taking the
Why
lead.
is the US ambassador to the United Nations the one who's being quoted significantly in this article? But this is how we have to present it. All these elements and the challenges that we are facing should anger our youth in the sense that we can do a lot better, and we are not doing a lot better. Force the elder generation, the ones who are ruling or misruling Africa now, to earn your friendship. Right now, they're not your friends, they're your enemy. And you treat them accordingly. It's amazing. It's mind-blowing. What can you say? What can you say? Tens of thousands of people have already been killed.
True.
In this conflict, which is pitting two generals. One who is the commander of the National Army, and one is the commander of the RSF.
Of a militia.
Right. In fact, it's an army in itself, because what happened was, before Omar al-Bashir was overthrown, the general who had ruled the country for decades, he had created two competing armies, the National Army and the RSF, thinking that, okay, if I have two armies, then I won't be overthrown because they would counterbalance each other.
Yeah.
Now these two armies are tearing down the entire country. And the saddest thing is this, and these are the other things, the only things I would like to add. As you know, the people of Sudan are highly educated, highly organized. They're the only one of the few African countries where the civilian population has overthrown military regimes several times, because their unions are very well organized. The workers, the professions like the doctors, the lawyers, the accountants, so they would transmit, they would plan, and they would protest, they would strike. They would put so much pressure that Think about it. When a military regime is brought down by civilians, they've been able to do that. And they were on the verge of doing it again. On the eve of their success, the two commanders of the rival armies hijacked their destiny and decided to sort their own differences at the expense of the entire country. It's a tragedy. Truly tragedy.
I'm going to add a plot twist to this, and indulge me. If you read this quote, it says the UN Security Council met behind closed doors to discuss the situation Monday and were briefed by UN political and humanitarian officials. A crisis of epic proportion is brewing, and to avoid further death, destruction, suffering, 5 things need to happen immediately, Thomas Greenfield said. First, the RSF must end its siege and build-up of military forces in El Fasher and swear off any attack on the cities. All parties to the conflict must take urgent steps to de-escalate. She also called for the protection of civilians and respect for international law, for external factors to stop providing the combatants with weapons, and for safe and unimpeded aid access. She also demanded that the parties return to the negotiating table. Because this conflict will not be solved on the battlefield, it will be solved at the negotiating table. Reading that, does that bear any resemblance to any other conflict?
Well, it's obvious that, the world, we live in the two worlds, right? There's a set of rules that are for the rest of the world, and then there's a set of rules which does not apply, rather, to the state of Israel. Absolutely. So you can make these, serious, threatening statements in the Security Council when it comes to Sudan. You will never make a statement like that. You can't even, in fact, not only are you not making a statement, you're arming an armed force that is actually committing genocide against, Palestinians. You're sending them weapon. On the one hand, the same ambassador has vetoed multiple ceasefire attempts in the past, right? So you can't speak from, two sides of the mouth and be taken seriously.
Seriously, exactly.
It's hypocrisy at its most crass, level. But one thing that will come out, and of course everything is tied in together. When we talk about Gaza, we talk about Palestine, Israel. We also talk about Africa, because all these things are connected, right?
Yeah.
Africa already inserted itself in this conflict in a major way when the Republic of South Africa intervened at the International Court of Justice. So Africa is very much involved in that conflict as well. I'm glad you exposed that analogy.
Go
ahead.
No, go on.
No, I'm saying the saddest thing is that the political calculation, right? So obviously, what the Biden administration is saying is that if we appear to be too firm on Israel, it might cost us the vote. We will lose the Jewish constituents in the United States. Right? And then individual members of Congress who are facing re-election also fear that a Jewish lobby organization would sponsor candidates against them. So their internal political dynamics is holding them back from actually doing the right thing and vigorously using the clout of the United States to bring this conflict to an end. I mean, yes, 1,200 Israeli citizens were killed when Hamas invaded. 1,200 Israeli citizens were killed. 1,200 Israeli citizens were killed when Hamas invaded. 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 1,200 But what is acceptable retaliation then?
How do you
What
justify?
level of retaliation is acceptable?
Yeah, how do you justify
Is
tens
it
of
10
thousands?
times? Is it 20? Is it 30? Is it 50? Is it 100? Is that when you'll say, oh no, now it's time to pursue
Now
peace?
yeah.
When in fact, you are now radicalizing future generations as well. And actually, I don't think you're making the state of Israel any safer by seeming to condone what is going on in Gaza right now. And that's why South Africa found a lot of support globally. They were trying to, they were attacking the foreign minister, minister of international relations, rather. They were calling her, yes, all these, racist attacks against her, threats against her life, and all that. But it turns out she was ahead of the game. South Africa and Africa was ahead. Now look at the student protest that is ongoing in the United States, and then nationally, and then internationally. And I covered the protests. I went to Colombia, which became like one of the early epicenters.
Yeah.
Because that is my school. That's where I studied journalism. So, and that helped because it was very difficult to get in. But I still have my ID because I went there and I was an adjunct. I'm an adjunct in the journalism department as well. So I was able to get in. Okay. And look at the way that has now spread globally, meaning there's a whole segment of the global population that wants, number one, peace, an end to the war. Number two, they want a two-state solution, not to just be rhetoric, but to be implemented once and for all. And I might say, as a consequence of this conflict, things are not going to be the same.
Of course.
The European countries are now talking, in fact, a few of them, it's very symbolic, of course, of recognizing a Palestinian state. You see, that's how prepared they are to push that momentum and to make it happen this time. I don't think the United States is going to be in a position to keep the lid over this issue.
That horse
right,
is
because the longer it went, the longer it went, the more people saw the atrocities globally, right? The more determined the population in many of these countries started pressuring their own governments that not only peace, but after peace, Palestinian state.
Yeah, this has to be done. And, I would just like to say the thing about international geopolitics now is the tone of the conversation has changed to the point where the people will not accept maybe or no. They're very clear as to what needs to be done.
No half measures anymore.
No half measures, exactly.
Because the solution begins by having a state for the Palestinians. And also another thing I want to add is what is very disgusting. This play by some elements, especially right-wing, including right-wing media, to equate protests and demonstrations against the genocide in Gaza, to equate that with anti-Semitism, which is the most corrupt and demeaning and ugly way of playing the race card. And I'm glad that prominent Jewish Americans like Senator Bernie Sanders, like
Norman Finkelstein,
right, and also Rich, the former, he was the labor secretary under Bill Clinton, have come out and said the same thing. No, to oppose Prime Minister Netanyahu's policy and what is going on in the atrocities in Gaza is not anti-Semitism. And they also lambasted that for trying to play that card, when it was not warranted.
So do you, one final question on that. Do you think we're going to see the what's it called, the economic boycott that we saw during the 80s with regards to South Africa?
Well, interesting that you bring that issue up because a lot of the European countries
Mm.
are now actually talking about that as well, because obviously they don't want to be seen as condoning or in any way, aiding and abetting what is going on right now. So, in fact, it's interesting that you say that because it could bring some analogy in terms of what was happening in dealing with apartheid South Africa, because many European countries came on board before the United States.
Mm.
The United
True.
States did not come on until
Until the
much,
very
much
tail end.
later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. And it would not, it started shifting, of course, when Jimmy Carter became president. You know, Carter was very significant in the liberation of the Southern African states. When they appointed, Ambassador Andrew Young, he was very vocal. He could afford to be very vocal because he knew he had the backing, of his president.
Yep.
You see? So now we might see something similar where the European countries would be at the forefront once again of insisting and demanding on a Palestinian state, and the U.S. would not be able to hold that back.
Now, our final story would be again, we're going to the former home of apartheid, and the issue there is the victims are seeking reparations.
Yes.
30 so South Africa apartheid victims demand reparations. 30 years after the end of apartheid, dozens of South Africans have set up a protest camp outside the Constitutional Court demanding reparations for human rights abuses suffered under white minority rule. And some might ask the question, why now? Well, it says that the protesters say since they weren't identified as victims of human rights abuses during the apartheid by South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, led by the late Archbishop Tutu, 28 years ago, they've not benefited from any reparation paid out by the government till date. While the group had protested in front of the court intermittently for years, their permanent camp outside the Constitutional Court only started November 2023. There's one part here where it stands out for me, and it is bear me a second. Yeah, here. We thought the TRC would bring us justice, he said about the South African Democracy Project. Now, if your population is saying what they consider to be the vehicle of seeking redress has not served them, is that not incumbent on the government, the present government, to see to it that that is the case, considering the fact that lower down in the piece it says there is still money that has not been disbursed?
This story is interesting to me only in suggesting what really needs to be done.
Mm.
Otherwise, the story in itself, if the context is accepted, then, I think our viewers and South Africans themselves will be falling into a trap, a very serious trap. Because first of all, it said the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had identified, I forget the figure of people who are entitled to compensation.
I
Was
think it's
it
about
21,000
I think it's
or
about
more?
21,000.
Was it 21 or 200?
I'll pull it up again. Share.
And then it was whittled down to 17,000 from the higher number.
Yeah.
What was the higher number?
Yeah. So initially, how many were identified? By a second. Okay, so initially in 2003, when the Truth Commission published its delayed recommendation for repatriation, it recognized 21,000, but then subsequently it was pulled down to 17,000 people eligible for reparation.
Okay. Okay, so look at the nonsense of that, right? every African citizen of South Africa deserves compensation. So why are we talking about,
numbers?
figures of 20-something thousand people? See, they're selling their story, and they're letting us buy that story, and now we start demanding, oh yeah, compensate all 21,000. No, millions of South Africans deserve compensation for what happened during apartheid. They deserve the type of compensation that descendants of enslaved Africans in the United States are demanding. That's the type of compensation and reparations they should be talking about. How are you going to calculate it beginning from when the Dutch settlers, British settlers, occupiers, I don't even like the term settlers. You don't come and take somebody's land, kill them, and then call yourself a settler. When the Europeans started arriving, do you calculate it based on when apartheid became the official national policy in 1948?
Yeah.
Do you calculate it from the day, that era, the year when Africans were kicked off their land and the land was given to Europeans and the laws were enacted to prevent Africans from having land? So there are ways to calculate some level of compensation to every African. Now, somebody would say, oh, this is impractical, it's outrageous. Actually, it's not. European South Africans have accumulated so much wealth. Number one, even today, European South Africans, on average, their per capita income is higher than that of European Americans. Think about that, right? Think about that. And then the accumulated wealth and the prevention of deprivation of Africans to accumulate and build wealth and transfer, intergenerational wealth. So they have to come up with some measures to tax the wealth that has been accumulated by Europeans and to transfer that wealth into a system that starts disbursing these checks. And you don't have to write a check one time and that's it. If you can tax an amount that is then put in funds that generate, income, and interest, then you can even calculate that for a period of, 15, 20, 25 years. Black African families are going to be getting this extra pay on their check or their annual returns. They're going to get a normal refund in addition to this amount of thousands of dollars. And then in 15, 20 years, we can say, okay, now we've shifted and balanced the playing field. Otherwise, you're going to have a permanent class of wealthy European South Africans. You benefited from the legacy of apartheid, and a permanent class of Africans who were deprived, just like you have in the United States, a permanent class of economically disenfranchised African descendants and Europeans who benefited from the proceeds of the enslavement of Africans. So that's the kind of conversation we should be having, and that I would be interested. Not a few, people badly in need who are sleeping in front of the court. No, that to me is a very small story. Let's go to the real story.
I mean, funny enough, you should hold that line, because I was in university when apartheid fell, and one of the things we debated in school then was, how do you amend or repair the people?
Right.
I was on the side who was saying that you need to have a system in place. And at that time, I said, a system, 25 years, free health, free education,
Yep.
quality housing, what was it? There was something else. There was something else.
No, but you're thinking the same line. Deal with
Training.
these things quickly so that it does not become a permanent albatross. Look at this country. You know, they knew the solution in the beginning, right?
With reconstruction, yeah.
Reconstruction. That's what it was supposed to address. But then the reactionary forces reversed all of that. And since then, they've never revisited that issue. But the fact that they even started to implement reconstruction it proves that they knew that this is one thing we want to deal with quickly, so that it does not become a burden down the line.
No, and I'm all, I'm on that page in the sense that if in 1994 such a program was put in place for 25 years,
think about that. We would not be having this conversation we're having today. We would not.
So I mean, sometimes when we seek to take the long view and we get the vested interest to dissuade us from taking what should be the rightful action, we then look back on time now, and they will be also the ones that will, oh, well, we don't have the money now. But you had the goodwill then. You made sure Mandela came out, put him in a rugby shirt, talk about a rainbow nation where the people that look like him were still disenfranchised. I mean, giving one the vote without giving them the economic means to, to keep that vote, to keep it meaningful. You are, I mean, it's painful. It's painful to look back on and to think again, Africa continues to play that role of catch up. The same thing in Zimbabwe. The same thing in Congo. This just constant drumbeat of the Africans don't know what is good for them. And yet when they rise up and ask the question, they're pushed back on as being, what's the word they love to use again? Unreasonable.
Right.
So,
I mean, this is hopefully this is the conversation that our sister and brother in South Africa will expand on, and push it to the limit and its logical conclusion.
Yeah, not just 21,000.
You can't just as Biko said, in that if you go to YouTube, listener, just put Steve Biko interview, and the interview is about 28 minutes. And Steve Biko said, and I'll never forget this, said, if we think ending apartheid, I'm paraphrasing, of course, ending apartheid means replacing the European ruling class with Africans, and then that's it, without transforming the economic system, redistributing wealth, then it would have been as if apartheid was never ended. That's what he said.
And
it turns out Biko was 100% correct.
And look at what we have now. Look at what we have.
Yep.
Again, thank you, comrade.
My pleasure, sir.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to have these conversations and to lift the veil on the Western media, because they tend to hide intentions behind.
Right. But the good thing, I must say, is that our viewers will learn how to read between the lines very quickly. Believe me, in a few short weeks, they will be reading the same thing that they've been reading, not in the same way anymore. Absolutely.
That is, and that will also help inform not just themselves, but also the kind of conversations they have with people around them, because that then means, we're doing something wonderful here. Again, I would appreciate your support. Please share, like, and get other people to subscribe. We're actually looking for 1,000 subscribers by July 31st. And the more we can get voices to put this in front of people, the more we can bring people around to thinking outside the norm, outside the neocolonial mindsets, or because it's important that Africa does not continue to play the second fiddle. It is only
Absolutely.
that the continent is only dark in the minds of those people who see it as one, not in the minds of the people who live within it. And again, thank you, Brother Milton, and thank you to viewers and listeners who will probably get this in audio podcasts. Again, you can get it on the video on YouTube, audio, whatever you get your podcast. And thank you again, Brother Milton, for coming through. And until next time, and yeah,
A luta continua.
yeah, victory as setter, as they will say. Thank you.